Hey guys, and welcome to another very exciting visual effects tutorial. Today I will finally start to go over all of the visual effects that we used for our Halloween horror special, The Ring. If you haven't seen the video yet, click on this link up here in the top right hand corner and go and check it out. There are quite a number of different visual effects in this short film, and the first one I want to show you how to create is that scene where Samara, played by Celina from Fables and Fashion, is crawling out of the well in that creepy forest scene. Let's have a look at the final effect that we will be creating. Unless you live near or in a haunted forest with an abandoned well where you can shoot the whole thing on location, chances are you're going to have to edit a photo of some plain old trees or a park to look like that haunted forest scene and then green screen someone into it so it appears as if they're crawling out of the well. In order to avoid boring you to death with an overly long video, I am going to break this tutorial up into two separate parts. In this video, in part 1, I will show you how to take a photo of some plain old trees, maybe from a suburban park, and turn it into a really creepy forest scene complete with murder well. In the next video I will then show you how you can composite someone into that scene and make it appear as if they're crawling out of the well. For this tutorial we are not going to use Adobe After Effects. Since we're just going to create a static background image for our creepy video, we will be using Adobe Photoshop instead. Now, this is still going to be an intermediate tutorial, and I will assume that you're at least familiar with the basic functionality of Photoshop, like working with selections, with brushes and with layers, but let's agree it's finally time for me to shut up and let's jump right into the tutorial. Here we are in Adobe Photoshop. I am using CC, but you should really be able to follow along with this tutorial with any version of Photoshop that you may have available. First, let's import our base image. I have this photo here that I took in one of the many parks in the suburbs of Melbourne. You can find a download link to this image in the description of the video. While this photo is actually not too bad for the scene I'm aiming for, you can see the roofs of buildings and paths through the trees. There's a sign on the grass and it simply looks too maintained. Fortunately, Photoshop will let us change all of that pretty easily. The first thing I want to do is to crop this image down to a 16:9 aspect ratio. To crop your image, hop over to your toolbar and select the rectangular marquee tool. Since I want to fit this image into my final composition, which will be 1920 by 1080, so 16:9 True HD, I want to select an area with an aspect ratio of 16:9. Photoshop lets you specify the aspect ratio of the rectangular marquee tool by changing the style of this tool to fixed ratio. Change the width and the height to 16 and 9 respectively, and now when you select, you automatically select an area with a 16:9 aspect ratio. The area I do want to select is the lower 2/3 of the image. I want a fair amount of grass in the lower half of the selection, and I don't want to get any of the open sky in at the top. This should do. To crop the image to your current selection, simply go to the menu bar and select Image, Crop. Bam! This looks much better already, but we do still have quite a bit to go to complete our haunted forest scene. Because I do want to avoid fully destructive changes, I will duplicate my base layer by selecting it and dragging it onto the New Layer button. Let's start by tweaking the colors of the image. Go over to the main menu and select Image, Adjustments, Shadows and Highlights. With this dialog box, you can control the brightness of the dark and the bright areas in your image. Currently, my shadows are way pushed up, which is why the entire image suddenly turned all bright. Let's bring the shadows back down to 0. What I really want to do is reduce the brightness of some of these overly light areas of the sky I can see through the trees. For this, simply increase the highlight amount setting. Notice how the bright areas of the image are being dimmed and the image appears a bit more somber. You can also tweak the tone property a little bit to control the tonal range of the bright areas that are being affected by the adjustment. Next, let's make the scene look nice and dramatic by turning it into a black and white image and then tinting it blue. Go to the main menu and select Image, Adjustments, Black and White. This dialog box might look a little bit complex, but what it gives you is a way to control how bright or dark the different color tones within your image will end up in the final black and white image. For example, we can bring down the green selector to darken all formerly green areas in the image for a little bit more of a dramatic look. Maybe that's a little bit too much. Let's push it back just a touch. Cool. Finally, we're not going to make an actual black and white movie, we just want a nice and creepy forest scene that looks as if it's being played back on a TV. So let's tint the entire image blue. For this, tick the tint checkbox in the black and white dialog. By default, this will use a lovely light brown orangish tone. Click on the color selector and then pick a bright, lightly saturated blue to color in your shot. This one I like. Maybe we'll push the hue just a tiny bit more towards green. Usually mixed colors will end up looking a lot more natural in your final effects. Finally, let's bump up the saturation to around 50. After all, this scene is basically being played back on an old crummy TV. Cool, we're slowly getting there, but it's still a bit too happy for my liking. Let's crush down those highlights in the sky a bit more. Go to the main menu and select Image, Adjustment, Curves. With the RGB curve selected, take the highlights and crunch them down a fair bit. This will further darken the highlights of the sky in our image. Finally, I think I will add just a little bit more contrast into the scene, so bump up the upper mids and push down the lows some more. Cool! We went from happy forest scene to a pretty dark shot. But we're far from done. Before we get to cleaning out all of the signs of civilization, let's quickly add a vignette to the shot. To add a vignette, create a new layer at the top of your project. Zoom out a little bit and select the elliptical marquee tool. Then draw one big ellipse right over the center of the image. Right now we have the contents of the ellipse selected, but we actually want to select everything except for the contents. To invert your current selection, simply go to the main menu and go to Select, Invert. Bam! Now we have only the corners of the image selected. Before we fill them in, however, let's soften out the edges of the selection so that the vignette blends smoothly into our forest scene. For this, go to Select, Modify, Feather. Set the feather amount to something fairly large, like 200 or 300, and then hit OK. Now we're ready to fill in the vignette. Go over to your toolbar and select the Paint Bucket tool. Make sure you have a black color selected and then fill the selected area. Bam! The layer adds a large amount of vignetting to our basic scene. However, it does look a little bit unnatural, and what I like to do is set the blend mode of my vignette layer to soft light. That looks much better in my opinion. Maybe I will lower the opacity a little bit as well, so it's not quite as strong. Now, I'm still not quite happy with the upper half of the image. The sky still seems too bright and too happy for the scene I'm going for. Let's add a dark gradient to the top of the image to suppress a lot of this unwanted happiness. Create a new layer at the top of your project. In the same slot as the Paint Bucket tool, you will find the Gradient tool. By default, the Gradient tool will create a simple black-white gradient. However, that is not quite what we want. What we want is a black to transparent gradient. For this, go over to the Gradient settings, select the color marker for the end of the gradient, and then bring down its opacity property to 0%. Then hit OK. Now draw a gradient over the top part of the image where a lot of the sky shows through the trees. Then go over to the layer settings and change the blend mode of the gradient to soft light, just like our vignette. Nice! You can see this layer does make quite a difference to the overall feeling of the scene. Now it's finally time to clean up all of the signs of human civilization, and we will do that using the almighty clone stamp tool in Photoshop. First, I want to create a new layer that will contain all of the clone stamp strokes. I do want this layer to sit below my vignette and below the gradient we created, so select the processed background image layer first and then click on the New Layer button. This new layer will hold all of our cloned elements. One thing I totally forgot to do when I filmed this tutorial is to disable the visibility of the vignette and the gradient layers. We do not want the contents of either of those layers to be included in what we are cloning, as they will sit on top of all of the other layers anyways. So make sure you disable the visibility while you are using the clone stamp. Now go over to your toolbar and select the clone stamp tool. I'm going to make my brush a little bit bigger. You can actually do this really easily by holding down Alt and your right mouse button and then moving the mouse right or left. You can also adjust the brush hardness by holding down Alt and your right mouse button and moving the mouse up or down. This is very handy. Make sure that you have the samples option of the clone stamp set to all layers. Otherwise this will not work since our currently selected layer is actually empty. The first thing I want to do is remove this edge of grass that clearly indicates that part of this ground is mowed on a, well, at least semi-regular basis. Alt-click somewhere onto the flat grass surface to place the source spot for the clone stamp. Then paint over the edge of grass to clone parts of the smooth grass area over it. Do this a couple of times and then pick a different spot on the even grass surface to use as a source location. Alt-click onto it to place the source spot and then brush over the edge of the grass a few more times. I like to move my source point around a lot to avoid pieces of my image looking duplicated. The human eye is very good at picking out repetition, so do watch out for that. Continue this process until you have completely removed the rough edge of the grass areas. Cool, it's looking much wilder already. I also just painted over the sign that was sticking out of the grass to remove it. Let's also remove this strange hump of grass over here on the right hand side, again using the exact same technique for the clone stamp. There. Now let's zoom in on some of the details, especially the parts of the image where civilization is showing through the trees. Place the source location for the clone stamp on some of the branches on the left using Alt-click, and then just paint over the buildings in the background to remove them. It's that easy. Continue through your image and fill in all the branch sections where you can see parts of buildings, paths or human elements from your image. And done. Check out the before and after. The clone stamp is one of my all-time favorite tools in Adobe Photoshop, and you can tell why. It's starting to really look like a creepy forest once you can't tell it's just in a suburban park anymore. Now it's time to add the well. While I haven't kept my project all too neat, let's create a new folder and call it Well. This folder will contain all of the layers relating to the well. Here I have an image that I prepared earlier. I created this image from a royalty-free 3D model of a well that I found on TurboSquid.com. You can find a download link to this image as well as to the original 3D model in the description of this video. Select the entire image with Ctrl A and copy it with Ctrl C. Then hop over to your forest scene, make sure the well folder is selected, and then paste the image into it pressing Ctrl V. Position the image of the well right in the middle of your scene, flat on the grassy surface. This well, in my opinion, is a little bit too tall and just not wide enough for what I envision, so let's simply resize it. Zoom in a little bit and hit Ctrl T to enable free transform mode. I'm going to squish and stretch the well out a little bit so it fits the dimensions I envisioned for this scene a lot closer. Make sure the well is still properly positioned in the center of the scene and then switch back to the Move tool. Say yes to apply the transformation and your well is officially reshaped. As you may notice, the well is just cut off flat at the bottom. We need to blend it more organically into the scene so it appears to be standing in between the grass on the forest floor. For this, again, we will use the Clone Stamp tool. Create a new layer above the well image, select the Clone Stamp tool and then clone a few bits of grass over the bottom edge of the well. I am doing this deliberately uneven to give it a bit more of an organic appearance. Cool, I'm good with this. Next, let's add the shadow for the well. All of the shadows in the scene are falling away towards the left side, so I will add a little bit of a shadow just on the bottom of the well falling off to the left. Create another layer in the well folder and select the brush tool. I'm going to shrink my brush down a little bit and reduce the opacity to maybe around 50%. Then, with black selected, start drawing at the base of the well to add a little bit of a shadow. Once done, change the blend mode of the layer to soft light and let's bring down the opacity a little bit to soften the shadow. Zoom back out and yeah, that's not bad. Next, the color of the well does not at all fit into our scene, so let's fix that. Select the well image layer and then open up the curves effect by going to Image, Adjustment, Curves. Go over into the blue channel and push it up by a lot to tint the entire well nice and blue. Then go over to the green channel and jack up the mids to match the image of the well up with the forest scene. I think I want the entire image to be just a little bit darker. For this I'm going to go back to the RGB channel and push it down a little bit. There, that's much better. Maybe a tad more blue and maybe a little bit more green. Getting visual effects right is a lot about tweaking and adjusting and looking at it again and making sure it all fits nicely together. I still feel the well is not saturated enough to really fit into the scene. Open up the vibrance settings by going to Image, Adjustments, Vibrance. Let's increase the vibrance as well as the saturation considerably to strengthen the color tint on the well. There! I think that looks a lot better. Finally, let's add a haze over the image to complete our creepy forest scene. Create a new layer just above the well folder in your project. I will actually rename this layer to Fog. Go over to the toolbar and select the brush tool. Scale up the brush size and feather it out as much as you can. Next, using the color picker from the toolbar, select a bright blue in your scene which we can use for the fog color. Picking a color that already exists in your scene will make sure that the fog blends in a lot better with your scene than trying to match it up manually afterwards. Once you've got your blue color picked, go back to the brush tool. Notice that my brush opacity is still set to around 70%, so it's not fully opaque. Now paint one massive brush stroke of fog from left to right across the entire image. Cool, that was easy. Finally, change the blend mode of the fog layer to linear dodge. I think I'll move the fog up by just a little bit, and I'll also increase the opacity of the vignette layer just to add a bit more of a dramatic effect. And with that we're done. We started with a simple photo of some trees in a suburban park, we color corrected it, and then we used the clone stamp to remove any signs of civilization. We then added a murder well into the scene, we added some fog, and finally a vignette and a dark gradient over the sky to create the perfect background for our girl out of the well visual effect. That was all pretty simple, right? Now, if you are just getting started with Adobe Photoshop and you would like me to create an absolute beginner tutorial for how to use this great piece of software, leave me a comment down below and I will put it onto my to-do list. In the next part of this tutorial, I will show you how you can composite someone into that scene to make it seem like they're crawling out of the well, and I will also show you how you can add some noise and twitch and damage effects to make it seem like it's a video playing on an old crummy TV, just like in the original movie for The Ring. I really hope you enjoyed this tutorial. As always, if you have any comments, questions or suggestions, just leave them down in the section below. Please remember to subscribe by clicking the subscribe button up there. Hit that like button and share the video around, it really helps out a lot. And if you're hungry for more, you can also find and follow me on Facebook, Twitter or on Google+. Until next time, I will see you later.